Welcome to Scaling Investment in Climate-Smart Agriculture Technologies in Africa. This event is being broadcast on World Bank Live at live.worldbank.org as part of an exciting program showcasing climate action around the world. My name is Ferzina Banaji, and I'll be moderating this event. If you would like to tweet or share your views, please use the hashtag ClimateActionWBG. Climate change and poverty are the defining challenges of our time. Luckily, in agriculture, solutions in one field double as solutions in the others. Today, you will hear about what is happening on the ground to make the promise of climate-smart agriculture a reality. We will kick off with opening remarks from Simeon Ehui, Regional Director of Sustainable Development Africa from the World Bank. We will then switch to a panel discussion featuring speakers from Ministries of Agriculture from Lesotho and Zimbabwe, from policy and research institutions like the Adaptation of African Agriculture to Climate Change and CIAT, and the private finance advisory company Clarmondial. Without further ado, let me welcome Simeon Ehui to provide opening context for today's discussion. Simeon, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Ferzina. I want to make sure that you hear me very well. Is that okay? So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our global audience. I'm really delighted here to be here with two ministers of agriculture from African countries and with representatives from the research community, the private sector, and the Adaptation of African Agriculture Initiative for this event on scaling investment in climate-smart agriculture technologies in Africa. Scaling up climate-smart agriculture on the continent is crucial for several reasons. The facts are well known, but are worth repeating. Agriculture is a key economic driver in Africa. It represents 30 to 40% of gross domestic product and employs up to 65% of the labor force. The impact of climate change are already reducing yields, making our people more vulnerable to food insecurity, and are projected to become increasingly severe. Climate change harmful and destructive impact will reduce Africa GDP and increase countries' adaptation costs. Agriculture is also a substantial contributor to greenhouse gas emission, while agriculture and agriculture-driven land use change contribute 24% of global GHG emission in sub-Saharan Africa. They contribute to almost half of the total GHG emission. Hence, given its importance to African countries' economies, contribution to GHG emission, and the sector's inherent vulnerability to climate change, African countries have given agriculture a prominent role in their climate strategies, as evidenced in their NDCs. Adaptation priorities of African countries have benefited from the climate-smart agriculture investment plans. They were developed over the past 3 years. These investment plans have been prepared in about 1/5 of African countries and identify investment that can work for farmers, contribute to the country's NDCs target, and drive increased investment. We will share lessons on such investment plans and their contributions to climate resilience and low carbon agriculture systems that work for people, economies, and the environment during our discussion today. We will also discuss the opportunities for private sector investment in CSA in Africa and how African countries can take advantage of prevailing and emerging climate finance architecture to support major agricultural systems transitions. Last, but certainly not least, the discussion will look at how research and innovation can support climate-smart agricultural prioritization and implementation. Agriculture is critical to our development challenges. We can't eliminate poverty without a robust agriculture sector that addresses people's basic needs, that provides jobs and responds to the challenge of climate change. Let's work together to ensure that agriculture continues to be part of the solution. I will now give the floor to our moderator, Ferzina Banaji, for the next step. Over to you, Ferzina.
Thank you very much, Simeon. That was Simeon Ehui, Regional Director of Sustainable Development, Africa for the World Bank. Since the Paris Agreement was signed, the World Bank has doubled the climate co-benefits of its new agriculture and food lending from 28% to 59%, a total of 2.9 billion in adaptation and mitigation investments just last year. These numbers reflect increased planning and demand from countries that are experiencing the impacts of climate change and taking action to protect food and nutrition security. With that in mind, I'm delighted to turn to the panel that we have today. I will call on our speakers, who each have 3 minutes or so, and I hope we can keep to time so that we can actually get to a second round of questions as well. Let me start with Dr. Lebesa, Director of Agricultural Research from Lesotho, who's here with us in person. Dr. Lebesa, what is your government doing to ensure that climate-smart agriculture is adopted widely in Lesotho?
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, in my country, because we are really experiencing the effects of climate change to an extent that, you know, the effects, we are not even productive enough to keep up with our food, and therefore we import most of the food that we have in the country. We actually partnered with the World Bank to produce the climate smart investment plan, which is actually what we can say is a roadmap for us that we are using, and it has identified some of the investment ways that we think are working for us. And we are following the 2 pathways, the commercial one and the resilient one. The reason for that is because in our country, we have part of the country that is prone to soil erosion, that has very thin soils. So the resilient one pathway seems to be working very well for us, you know, like to restore the land. But also the commercial pathway also is important when you look at some of the commodities that have the high potential, like the horticulture, the small cycle or the short cycled animals, which are actually, so those are the investment ways in which the government has looked into, you know, in developing that. The stakeholders, different stakeholders were involved, and we're building on what was already existing. Like we already had the NSDP, the National Strategic Development Plan 2, which was already talking about commercialization. It was talking about diversification to make sure that agriculture diversifies into different horticultural, different products, agricultural products that can make a difference in the country. And then we're also looking into our climate change policy, you know, how it has been structured to also include agriculture as one of the chapters that are very important in there. So to make sure that it is put into practice, is not just a policy. So some of the projects, for example, that the Ministry of Agriculture developed, such as the Agricultural Productivity Program for Southern Africa, which is dealing with the technologies, most of the technologies that are climate smart, to make sure that we cushion the farmers that we have as they transition, because most of our farmers are smallholders, but as they transition from the smallholder to the commercial level. But we also have another bigger project, which is about like 62 million US dollars, which is the smallholder agricultural development project, which is basically targeting the smallholders, you know, like moving them from the the smallholder, transitioning them to the commercial level. So those are some of the ways in which the government of Lesotho is trying to reach different, and those are being reached through the grants programs, in which most of them are actually dealing with the climate smart practices to make sure that even as they do their horticultural, because most is horticultural, but even other crops, at least they are able to be cushioned against the climate change effects.
Thank you. Let me pass to Mr. Tapererwa, Chief Director of Agricultural Extension from Zimbabwe, who's joined us remotely. Mr. Tapererwa, what is Zimbabwe's experience with implementing climate smart agriculture?
Yes, thank you very much, Moderator. In fact, the Minister was supposed to be here today with us, but however, he has given me his speech to read. So I'll quickly go through what the Minister has given me. Agricultural production in Zimbabwe is under threat from climate change and multiple weather-related shocks like drought, floods, extreme temperatures, pests, and diseases leading to food insecurity and the country being a net food importer. In the past, such extreme weather events compromised the food security every 10 years. This has now accelerated to almost every 2.5 years, which is clearly too frequent for the country's agriculture sector to recover. In response to these climate-related changes, the government of Zimbabwe collaborated with the World Bank through the Zimbabwe Reconstruction Fund and other key partners to integrate climate change into the country's agriculture policy agenda. One such initiative was the Zimbabwe Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan, which identified investments that offer the greatest potential to transform Zimbabwe's agriculture into a robust and more productive, climate-resistant and low-emission sectors. As government, we then identified and adopted at a national scale some conservation smart investments. We have introduced a flagship climate smart agriculture in vernacular called Fumbudza, in Ndebele it's called the Intwasa program, which is a sustainable cropping production intensification technique whereby farmers concentrate resources on a smaller piece of land, resulting in higher productivity and profit margins. Through the Climate Smart Scheme, which was launched in 2020, number one, 1.8 million farmers were provided with input subsidies and expected to adopt conservation agriculture principles, including minimum soil disturbance, mulching, and crop diversification. Secondly, yield increased. In the past, the average yield has been 0.7 tons per hectare, but last year, because of this climate smart, the yield for maize rose to 5.2 tons per hectare. Smallholders who adopted climate smart practices experienced phenomenal increase in yields, producing 40% of the total maize production in the country in the just ended 2021 farming season. Beneficiaries of the program have now been increased to 2.4 million farmers so that the benefits can cover more smallholder farmers. The Zimbabwe Agriculture Sector Disaster Risk Report, jointly prepared by my ministry and the World Bank, shows that the country loses approximately $126 million each year due to production risks from extreme weather-related shocks. Our smallholder farmers are the most vulnerable, and there is a greater need of farmers to take up insurance against such risks. As such, we are now piloting in 2 districts a yield-based insurance program for farmers under the Fumbudza Intwasa program. And as more resources become available, we will scale up to the rest of the country. Diseases remain the major cause of cattle mortalities, followed by drought-related deaths, accounting for 69% and 21% respectively. As such, climate proved the livestock sector is a goal of my ministry. This has been done through mainstreaming climate change in agriculture extension services and in the curriculum of all our agriculture training colleges. Furthermore, the country completed its national adaptation planning and is embarking on a low emission strategy as articulated in its national determined contribution, which seeks to reduce carbon emission by 40%, inclusive of the agriculture, forestry, and the other land use sectors. These developments all provide pathways to reducing the negative impact of climate change on agriculture and increase the adaptive capacity of farmers. This climate smart agriculture that we've adopted as a country, we are employing in cereals, in small grains, sorghum, pearl millet, etc. And this year, we have taken cotton on board. This brings to the end of the minister's report for Minister of Agriculture in Zimbabwe. I thank you.
Very much. And thank you for some of those very striking statistics. I think in comparison with what you were describing about the process, hearing about those numbers really also puts it in perspective. Let me pass to Ms. Lemseffer, Director General of the Initiative for the Adaptation of African Agriculture to Climate Change. Ms. Lemseffer, how can policies and investments support CSA implementation at scale?
Well, hello, good evening, everybody. Well, first of all, very happy to participate in this panel in the COP26, and maybe happy that the AAA initiative has survived to until COP26, and maybe and now it's held by a foundation, and we're very happy to share today our experience about CSIPs. So to answer very briefly this question, how can policies and investments support CSA implementation at scale? I think I will not repeat what have been said with by my friends. I think that the relevance of the CSIPs is not to be proven today. But I think that speaking about our proper experience, I will repeat what Simeon has said. He said that a fifth of the African countries now has CSIPs. We are very happy to have participated in the majority of them, because we have been working about the CSIPs of Morocco, Côte d'Ivoire, Mali, Cameroon, Ghana, Burkina Faso, and the Republic of Congo. I think that what we need now to support the CSA implementation is to be more targeted in the in the financing that we want to provide those CSIP. For example, we have heard the tremendous experience of Zimbabwe, and I'm really, really happy to hear that the CSIP in Zimbabwe have been going forward, and that there are already impacts on growers. We have the same example here in Morocco, because we have succeeded to enter one part of the CSIP, which was linked to water, into the big program between the World Bank and Morocco on the agriculture sector. But the instrument we need for the implementation of the CSIP is that I think DFIs, such as the World Bank, can put more support, more financial support for the CSIP to transform this scientific and let's say very theoric work that has been done and that now exists, to very concrete projects on the ground. And I think that there is also some leadership to be taken on this topic of CSA. And I think that the World Bank can properly take this leadership to convince other DFIs to support more CSIPs, and really not each time we want to talk about agriculture and climate change, to reinvent the methodology and to reinvent the approach, because I think that the CSIPs have needed money, means, people, research institutions from everywhere in the world. So I think that what we need now to to support the CSA implementation at scale is really to advocate for the thing that the CSAs can be the basic for the agricultural development in the African countries who has a climate smart agriculture investment plan.
Thank you. Let me now turn to Andy, who's here in the studio with us. Andy Jarvis, Associate Director General at the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT. How effective is climate smart agriculture investment planning in delivering NDCs? NDCs are everywhere we look right now here at the COP. So tell us a little bit about that, and what's the role of research in providing evidence-based policy and investment?
Thanks so much. Yeah, so we're a knowledge partner, and we've been working with the World Bank and with the AAA initiative in developing some of these investment plans and working with partner governments so that we're facilitating, we're bridging between now and those NDCs. When we need to deliver, how do we get there? Where do we need to deploy this finance? And so, it's very impressive to hear $2.9 billion have been deployed of climate finance. We all know that are in this business that we have to make every single dollar count, because that's a drop in the ocean of the tremendous demands that are still out there for adaptation and work towards delivery of the climate agreement. So we've worked on these investment plans, and it's really about how do we set out what needs to happen now? What are the projects, where are the priorities where we need to put that investment in that will help us get there to those NDCs? And so really the process is one of making sure, and I think in doing this what's critical is making sure that we're listening, and so we're responding to partner needs. And so we convene multi-stakeholder platforms within the countries. We listen to government, we listen to civil society, private sector. We listen to where people are seeing these are the greatest needs. We're bringing analysis, and so this is it's very important we're making evidence-based decision-making in this, and so we're bringing analysis and data to it to look at, quantify, well, where are some of the challenges? What are some of the problems? What, if we were to do this, what would be the potential impact? How much would it cost? And so we do, that analysis, and then essentially synthesize it so that we can be saying, so these are projects that will help this country reach, move from where we are today to delivery of these NDCs, and these are going to be the most cost effective. We're going to get the biggest bang for our buck with these kinds of projects, and so and you get a diverse array of plans and projects coming out from these processes, and you get the numbers to be able to then move towards the action side, right? I have a son who has been bothering me that I'm doing too much blah blah blah. I think these CSA investment plans are exactly about this. This is what we need to do, and these are the impacts that we'll have. So it's absolutely critical to move us towards those NDCs.
Thank you. And you mentioned bang for your buck, so this is the right time to ask Tanja Havemann, Director of Clarmondial, to talk to us a little bit about the financing. How can African countries take advantage of existing financing to support key agricultural systems transitions?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Just a little bit about me. So Clarmondial is an investment advisory company. We actually structure and advise funds, including the Food Securities Fund, and we work with private companies and also investors in terms of getting more investment into sustainable natural resource management in emerging markets. And we have very hands-on experience, including in Africa, where we have colleagues based in Cote d'Ivoire and in Nairobi. I think a couple of points. I mean, obviously we talk a lot about funding, but it's not always clear sort of what needs to be funded, who should be responsible for such funding, what are the most suitable sources of such funding, what are the potential returns, and where are those returns going to come from, or are they going to be cost savings that then can be allocated in order to mobilize investments. So I think investors, it's important when you develop those plans to think a little bit about, if we need to mobilize additional private capital to complement ODA funding, which I think most people recognize that we need to do, the ODA funding is simply not enough. Then we also need to think a little bit about investor requirements and the things that investors or the private sector looks at when they look at investment opportunities. And those include, the financing structure. Is it a fund? Is it a bond? Is it a listed product? What the risk return requirements, what the risk return characteristics are of that, including things like currency, counterparty risk, track record, but also things like liquidity. Is this an investment that's likely to pay off in 1 year, or do I need to wait 20 years for this to pay off? I think governments play a really important role, and I think it's great that governments both in developed countries as well as in emerging economies step up and try to do more to get more meaningful investment into the space. I think it's been encouraging to see, for example, an allocation of special drawing rights, including a loan of special drawing rights to some of the least developed countries. I think that should also help to make sure that the lower income governments can actually mobilize more financing, which they need to do for public goods. And obviously groups like the World Bank play a critical role in those kind of things. And it would be great to see more discussions around things like debt restructuring and debt forgiveness to enable the developing and emerging countries more fiscal space to actually make these kind of investments that they need to make. In addition, obviously there are, in the landscape of things that need to be funded, there are things that will never really be commercially viable, that will always need concessionary funding, at least in the economic systems that we have today. And there are things that are commercially viable today, and there are things that may eventually become commercially viable if they have a little bit of support. So I think it's important to think about things that way. And we have experience, for example, of the Global Environment Facility, which is now opened up to things like non-grant instruments, as well as things like the GCF, where obviously government support can be really important in enabling those things. But I think that some African governments also have experience with things like public-private partnerships, and putting in place investment incentives to make sure that those investments take place and private sector capital can be mobilized in those economies. I would also say that for many of the smaller emerging and developing countries, things like blended finance, both in terms of blending that can happen through investment incentives, but also blended finance through partnerships with DFIs, including things like USAID and the Swedish government, can be really very meaningful and very interesting. And then I would also encourage some of the smaller governments to maybe stick together to try to get to the scale that private sector often needs to see in terms of a financing instrument. So in short, I think the climate smart agriculture investment plans are interesting in that they provide the government kind of a roadmap for where some of the investments could be prioritized. But I do think that there are opportunities to build on that, to look at where are the things that are investable at the moment, and what maybe needs a bit of support, and the best ways of doing that, and making sure that where it's possible that private sector entities become responsible for taking on some of those costs and also some of those outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. And in fact, as you were speaking, I could see colleagues nodding on the call and in the room. So I'm going to stay on that topic for just another quick round of questions. And I'm going to ask first the panel here, and then those of you who have joined. We're hearing, out here in Glasgow, in the COP, or if you're talking about agriculture in Africa specifically, adaptation and resilience are an absolutely critical priority. Do you think, and I'll start with you, Dr. Lebesa, do you think that the financing is in place to support the shift to climate smart agriculture, or what would you like to see happen?
Thank you very much for that question. Actually, I was dying to to have my say on that one. That, yeah, if we talk about the climate financing, I would really say it is not enough, at least for the developing countries. Maybe we need the capacity we need to be capacitated on how to really access that finance. Maybe it is enough, but for us, we really need a lot of capacity building to make sure that we are able to access that. We have our, like I talked about, our farmers that we are saying they are transitioning from smallholder to commercial. And there are so many shocks that they have to be guarded against. There are technologies that have to be developed. And then you don't have enough money or enough finance for the innovations that the farmers can use, for them to actually transition. But also the issue that came out that I think I really am really embracing is that also in our countries, at least mine, the private sector also has to step in. And for them to step in, they also have to be kind of capacitated to take over. It cannot be the government. The government's role is actually supposed to be facilitating, but the private sector has to step in so that, issues like this, they are at the forefront. So I think out of this COP26, really, one of the things that we would want to see coming out clearly is how an increased, financing for the climate change issues.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me stay in the studio for 1 minute and ask Andy the same question. Is the financing in place? What do you need to see?
I mean, we need to vastly increase the financing. The scale of the problem is much, much bigger than what the finance on the table is right now. And this is a reality, and many institutions are scrambling and pushing very hard to bring that finance there. But I mean, this is a bigger problem that we face in the world. The magnitude of the problem is way beyond right now what the finance can deliver in terms of solving it. So that's the first thing. But I think, one of the critical pieces that we need to work on is making sure that the finance that we do have is impactful, but at the same time streamlined. And just as you were saying, the capacity to access that, the complexity of accessing at the moment climate finance is very high, and I think we've got to think very openly about how we can make that access to it simpler for countries, and we don't have time to waste to kind of learn to then do. We need to do and learn at the same time, I think, and so there's a lot to be done also about just making this more streamlined, making it an easier process to access, and developing a finance arena that's kind of an ecosystem that's mixed, where there's quick funding available for piloting and innovating, that there's, as you scale the investment up, obviously it gets more you need to have much more evidence, much more diligence in that process. But I think you need to create an ecosystem that can respond more quickly throughout.
I noticed, Mr. Tapererwa, that you were nodding when we mentioned concessional finance. So I'd like to ask you maybe to talk a little bit about what you see in terms of the financing landscape.
Yes, thank you so much. Financing is a major challenge. In Zimbabwe, what we are saying is treasury, which is taxpayers' money, is being used to finance the inputs to provide for the vulnerable groups. And the government, the way how they look at it is that if government does not provide those resources, local resources, local currency, it will now be forced to look for Forex, foreign currency, to import the food. So it's cheaper to look for local currency so that farmers contribute towards food production on their own. Their major challenge is that they can't access inputs on their own. So the approach that we're taking in climate smart agriculture is that the farmers, they provide labor, they dig holes, that is their own labor, and then government will come in with input. So it's cheaper to give them inputs than to look for Forex to import the food. That way now it becomes self-sustaining, so to speak.
Talia, maybe let me ask you also I mean, I know that you already gave us a really good overview of this, but is there anything you would like to add in the context specifically of COP26 right now?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, look, I think the last estimate I saw pre-COVID was that the annual financing gap for the SDGs is 2.5 trillion a year. I think the allocation now of the special drawing rights to emerging and developing markets was 275 billion. So you can see just there, I mean, that there is a huge financing gap. And frankly, I think it's a bit ridiculous that at these times when we have been having record low interest rates in much of the sort of developed world, that we see interest rates and access to financing be constrained further and further for emerging markets at the time when they need it the most, because they're facing all these issues that have maybe not necessarily that much to do with them in most cases. So I think these are issues that really need to be addressed quite urgently, how we enable private sector entities and also governments to have the fiscal space to really invest and meet the adaptation challenge. I think there are some really critical things to be done there. It's simply not fair.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists for these extremely rich insights. I'm going to take advantage of being the moderator to ask people to give me one word that sums up your hope for helping farmers to adapt to climate change in Africa. And I'm going to start again in our studio with you. One word. You can take 5 words.
Access to climate finance for smallholder farmers.
Thank you. Andy?
I'll focus in on innovation. If we're going to solve this, we need to innovate.
Thank you. Mr. Tapererwa? I think you might be on mute, actually. If we could ask you to unmute. Yes.
Yes, climate change is real. Yes, climate change is real. And the adaptation of climate smart agriculture is the way to go, the way how I look at it. Because we still have got a long way to go before we develop as much irrigation as possible. So if we adapt climate change innovations, that's the way to go for us to become food self-sufficient.
Thank you. Tanja?
Yeah, and I guess my request would just be that we start getting more granular around what the asks and the investment needs actually are, and then start to better assign responsibilities. So the things that require concessionary capital and development finance that is, grant funding, let's do that. And the things where private sector can be made responsible, let's also figure that out and find ways to make them responsible and then for them to act.
Thank you. I'm wondering, I think I can see Simeon also still online. May I ask you if you have one word to share on how you would like to see your hopes for supporting farmers to adapt to climate change in Africa?
Yeah, thank you, Ferzina. For us, the key point is to ensure that the farmers in Africa have access to the technologies that can help them to farm in a way that the food system can be resilient. So let's say zero carbon type of fertilizers, farming practices that are not allowing high emission of the greenhouse gas emission. Also, for livestock, for example, how you feed the livestock has a direct impact on the kind of the quantity of methane emitted by the animals. So we need to help countries to adopt those technologies that can help them to have a resilient farming system. That's what we're working on. The other aspect we're working on is also to support countries to adopt those policies at the highest level. So at the World Bank, for example, at this moment, what we are working with countries to develop something called the country climate development report, where we are looking at the relationship between climate and development, and specifically in the agriculture sector, identify those policies that are needed to be able to help improve the resilient farming system. What is key, Ferzina, is how the resources already at hand are used. We are recommending that the subsidies that are not properly targeted be actually used for research and development directed toward more resilient systems. That's what we are helping countries for. Over to you.
Thank you. I took away from that good policies that are granular, that are innovative, that take into account the reality of what's happening for communities, for farmers, and that think about the capacity needs and think about how you're actually building the capacity on the ground. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us remotely or here in the studio. Please do check out the replay. It will be available at live.worldbank.org. Thank you very much.
Okay.